Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're doing a walking talking mock for Lord of the Flies for AQA GCSE English Literature. All you need is paper and a pen, and we're going to be looking at Ralph today. By the end of our time together, you will have written a model response for Ralph. And here's today's question. Explore how Golding presents the character Ralph in Lord of the Flies. So we need to look at how Ralph is presented in the novel and how Golding uses Ralph to communicate ideas about society for 30 marks. We're in the first 5 minutes of the examination and we need to plan. We need to think carefully about what we're going to explore in our essay. Today we're going to have an introduction that's also going to explore context. We're going to think about how Ralph gives false hope to the boys on the island. Ralph makes some mistakes early on. We're going to think about those. We're also going to explore the way that Ralph can't stand up to Jack. Ralph ultimately is involved in the killing of Simon, and then we're going to conclude. And in that moment, we're going to think certainly about how Golding uses Ralph to make some big statements about society. Okay, it's time for our introduction. So in this paragraph, there's 3 things that we're going to explore in about 5 minutes. We're going to talk about the fact that William Golding was a naval officer in World War II. That influenced his writing. We're going to mention that the novel is about good versus evil and the fight for power between Jack and Ralph. And we're getting Ralph into that opening paragraph, so we're focused on the question. And then we're going to explore why he might have wanted to write a novel about power and Ralph failing to avert the failing of civilization at the time of writing. You have about 5 minutes to see how much of that you can work through, and then you'll hear from me to move you on. Okay, you've had 5 minutes on your introduction. It's time for us to move on to part 2 of our response. For part 2, we're going to explore how Ralph gives false hope to the boys on the island. So that's the point that we're going to make at the beginning of our paragraph. Each paragraph is going to have one of those bold statements that we've already considered in our planning. So Ralph gives false hope. The first thing you're going to do is analyse the quote, "This is a good island." That's what he says at the beginning. And we know as readers that it isn't. We've had birds that give a witch-like cry, and we've got skull-like coconuts on the beach. So we can already recognise that that's quite naive from him. And then if you've got the time to, and certainly if you're aiming for that 7, 8, 9, the average 9 uses about 9 responses well, 9 quotations well, sorry. You're going to analyse Daddy's ship, which is what he thinks that will come to rescue them, and how that infantilises Ralph and makes him look quite naive. And then you can explore the idea that he begins to change the character when he starts to refer to his father later in the novel. You've got 5 minutes to do that now, and when you're at the end of your time, you'll hear from me. Okay, you've had your 5 minutes thinking about that first paragraph, analysing the text. Now it's time to move on to our second big point about the character in part 3. You're going to explore the mistakes that Ralph makes early on. So that's your point. When you've made that, you can explore this reference. His name's not Fatty, it's Piggy. And you can explore the social hierarchy in chapter 1. Ralph is voted chief, but then ultimately gives Jack the power over his choir to be hunters. And you can talk about how that's a bad move and how betraying Piggy is something that foreshadows his failings later on in the novel. If you get the chance to, this is something that's certainly conceptualised. You can analyse the motif of falling. Everything falls in the novel. The boys fall, the conch falls, the glasses fall. You can talk about how that reoccurrence of falling foreshadows his failure to lead. You have got 5 minutes and you'll hear from me when the time is up. Okay, well done. We are certainly about halfway through our response at the moment, and you're doing really well. The next thing we need to do is make the next point and then start using evidence to back that up. So Ralph fails to keep Jack from gaining influence over the island and over him. So we can talk about how Ralph changes. That's certainly a little bit more higher level, but at the very least we can talk about how Jack gains influence, and we can see that happening in the novel. So we've got this quote to analyse. Like a wolf, that's how Ralph eats his meat that when he's fed by Jack, and that similarly sort of shows how Ralph is losing his position at the top of the social hierarchy. It's zoomorphic. It also alludes to him sort of losing his humanity. That's something for you to analyse. And if you get the chance to, you can analyse the quote, "The desire to hurt and squeeze was overmastering." What can you say about that? It's from the moment where there's a game of Kill the Pig involving a boy called Robert, and Ralph is involved in it and takes great pleasure in being involved in that moment. So those are the bits of evidence that you're going to analyse to make this point. You've got 5 minutes, and you'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, part 5. Before we conclude, we're going to make a final bold point about Ralph, and any great response about Ralph really should explore that he also has a dark side, and he's involved in Simon's death. So our big point here is that Ralph is involved in killing Simon. We're keeping it simple, but what we're then going to say is going to be what's going to impress the examiner. So you're going to analyse that moment of Simon's death. There were no words and no movements, but the tearing of teeth and claws. There is so much for you to analyse there. We've got a ironic echo of teeth and claws. That's what was the beast was meant to have when it was mentioned earlier on, and it turns out that that's ultimately what the boys become, the thing that they feared, and the beast is the darkness of man's heart. Ultimately. So you can analyse that moment. You can also think about why Golding's chosen Ralph to be involved in that moment. And if you get the chance, you can then explore how he weeps for the darkness of man's heart. We all, for Golding, have dark hearts, which is that reason that he chose Ralph to be involved in that. You've got 5 minutes to explore that. You'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, it's time to conclude. If you're aiming for a 4-5-6, here are some key questions for you. Why do you think Golding chose for Ralph to be involved in Simon's death? And what do you think he's saying about human nature through his telling of Ralph's story? If you're aiming for a 7-8-9, in this time you might also be able to explore why Golding wanted humanity to be less naive in a post-Holocaust world. The idea that at the end you've got Ralph cannot understand the significance of them sharpening a stick at both ends for him, and he's clearly incredulous, and that in a post-Holocaust world could communicate something about humanity that you could explore here. So that's your conclusion. You've got 5 minutes to write that. You'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, at this point, we should have written our response. You've got a few minutes to have a look through what you've done, read it back carefully, and then think very carefully about what else you might be able to add or correct. And you've got a little bit of extra time to add or continue your conclusion if you need that time now. You've got 5 minutes. Okay, here's the mark scheme. In front of you now, you should have an exploratory and well-structured response. You should have been convincing and critical, and together we've hopefully been able to provide our examiner with a lot of analysis and exploration of the text. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content and feel free to ask for something you'd like me to cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell and share, and keep revising.